Where will the top NFL free agents sign this off season? Welcome, football fans, to my official NFL free agency predictions for 2025's NFL free agency period. I'm predicting the landing spot for the top 25 NFL free agents. If that sounds good, Gronk, spike the like button, and don't forget to comment your opinion on my predictions. Do you love them? Do you hate them? Do you disagree or agree? Let me know in the comment section below. And if we get 100 likes on this video, I will release part 2 of my NFL free agency predictions. In this video, I'm focusing on the top 25 names in free agency, according to myself. These are my top 25 free agents this off season from number 1 through number 25, and I'm predicting the landing spot for each player based on finances, based on football, and based on the needs of the teams. Let's get started. We're going to begin with my number 1 free agent available this offseason, and that is technically T. Higgins. I have T. Higgins staying with the Cincinnati Bengals, at least for now. And we're going to talk through this. So first, I believe the Cincinnati Bengals will attempt to franchise tag T. Higgins. Okay? I think they will try to franchise tag T. Higgins. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he will stay with Cincinnati. It could mean that he gets traded, okay? That he actually goes somewhere else. So first, I could see Cincinnati tagging T. Higgins in order to open up a window for extension, allowing more time, more air for them to work out a contract, okay? But that is not a certainty, given the fact that T. Higgins has already been putting out some tweets about, not really sure he's going to stay in Cincinnati. But at the same time, Joe Burrow usually gets what he wants. So honestly, I could see it going either way. Now, who would trade for T. Higgins if he were available? Okay, there are a couple of teams that stand out. I don't think the New England Patriots will be one of those teams, according to reports. As much as it would make sense for the Patriots to target a big perimeter X receiver with great hands that can go up and win in one-on-one contested situations, it doesn't appear that T. Higgins will be in the cards. Maybe an alternative trade for all Pats fans out there. A team like the Chargers would make a lot of sense. They do need a perimeter wide receiver that can go vertical and open up the offense and win on the outside and take pressure off Ladd McConkey. And he would be perfect with Justin Herbert. Let's face it, right? Another team that would make a lot of sense is Washington to complement Terry McLaurin. Higgins is at his best when complementing Jamar Chase, and Washington has plenty of money to throw at another weapon for Jaden Daniels. And if they want to keep the trajectory upward for their franchise and not regress this next season, I think trading for a big-time wide receiver like T. Higgins would be the right approach. So those are two teams that if he doesn't stay with Cincinnati, which is going to be my prediction, he will stay and sign, but he will definitely be franchise tagged with the Cincinnati Bengals. My official prediction, though, will be that he does sign. I just wanted to talk through all of this just in case both of those things could potentially happen, because this is an ongoing situation. My number 2 free agent is Trey Smith. And Trey Smith today, as of making this video, was franchise tagged. So I wanted to keep him in the video, and I wanted to talk about whether or not I agree or not, and whether or not I could see him actually getting traded. Because he's making $20+ million. I think it's around 23 or something like that on the franchise tag for a guard who is good, but in my opinion, not great. I think he's arguably a top 10 guard in the NFL, but that's also in Kansas City under Andy Reid, protecting Patrick Mahomes, who's one of the smartest in terms of avoiding sacks, being elusive. He's very well used in the running game. He's beside Creed Humphrey, and he's next to Joe Thuney. Like, yeah, he's good, but he was a mid-round pick. To me, he feels replaceable, if you understand what I'm saying. So I kind of disagree with Trey Smith being franchise tagged by the Chiefs, just because I feel like they have bigger needs. Like, I would have rather spent that money on a tackle, or I would have rather spent that money on their defensive line or their defense in general. Like, they have a lot of things to think about moving forward, this Kansas City franchise, and I think spending that much money on a guard is a mistake. I personally think it is a mistake, because I've seen Andy Reid be able to cook up a storm with limited players, or guys that he could pick up off the street, or guys that he could draft in the 3rd or 4th round at the tackle or guard position. It doesn't always work for them, right? But usually, typically, they're able to develop those players rather well. So I'm just a little shocked by this, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. That being said, there is a possibility Trey Smith gets traded to, let's say, Chicago. So I want to throw Chicago out there as a team. I think this would take a team like the Chargers out of the discussion because they're within the same division. But a team that has close ties from a franchise perspective, a general manager perspective, with Poles being a former chief employee, that would make sense if there is a trade to be had there. But it does appear that the Chiefs are intent on keeping Trey Smith to protect Patrick Mahomes. And I understand they want to keep that fearsome trio in the interior, which is the best in football. But I just feel like that money could have been better utilized elsewhere to help develop this roster in other areas. But you guys let me know what you think in the comment section below. Now, my next, number 3, free agent for 2025 is Zack Baun. And I believe Zack Baun will re-sign with the Philadelphia Eagles. And guys, remember, I'm trying to be correct. I'm trying to be right. I'm trying to be accurate on my predictions here. So yeah, it's been a little boring so far, but I'm trying to actually predict these things. So I'm trying to give you legitimacy here. I'm not just trying to be wild for the sake of it. And I know it's really hard to predict free agency, but I'm trying my best, okay? Zack Baun to the Philadelphia Eagles. This just makes too much sense. I mean, Vic Fangio, first of all, loves linebacker play. His linebackers are very impactful in his defenses and how successful they are year in and year out. You think of his days in San Francisco with Patrick Willis. You think of, obviously, Chicago with Roquan Smith and Danny Trevathan even. You think of now Philadelphia with Zack Baun. And really, the only period where he didn't have a great defense in the last few seasons or last decade of him coaching in the NFL as a defensive coach was really Miami, and they didn't have great linebackers. So I feel like keeping Zack Baun, his ability both as a blitzer, as the leading tackler, as a coverage man especially, his ability to just see the field, read the field, pick off passes in big moments this year, he does it all. He does it all really well, and he's their own development. He is their own project, right? They took this guy off the scrap heap that nobody thought was very good, that was a Saints cast off, and they signed Zack Baun and made him arguably the best linebacker in football in 2024. That means something to Howie Roseman. That is their investment. And it's almost Howie Roseman's ability to flex on everyone across the NFL and say, like, yeah, this is our guy. We took him off the scrap heap and we made him a star, and now we're going to pay him like a star because I found him. And to me, I think this just makes too much sense for both sides. He fits the scheme perfectly. Why would he want to go anywhere else after breaking out with this team when he was not really given much of an opportunity in New Orleans? If he went somewhere else, he's kind of risking the possibility that maybe he doesn't play at the same level in a different scheme. So I think it just makes too much sense, right? Next up, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers re-signing Chris Godwin. I know I would love him to come to New England. I think Pittsburgh fans would love to have Chris Godwin. I think that Washington would be a perfect fit schematically for Chris Godwin. I think Carolina, with his connection to Canales, or Jacksonville, with his connection to their new head coach, Liam Cohen, would be interesting, but I just think Chris Godwin is very loyal. Chris Godwin's one of my favorite players in the NFL. He is one of the most respectable human beings in football. Like, he is such a kind guy. It really does seem that way. And I think he's one of the more loyal players you'll find. And I think just like Mike Evans, he's going to go back to Tampa Bay. Even if it's for a little bit less money, I think it does help Tampa Bay that Godwin does have a little bit of an injury tag next to his name. He's had torn ACLs. He's had, basically season-ending injuries multiple times in his career. And despite his production, despite his talent, despite him leading the NFL in receptions and numerous other statistics when he went down with injury this past season, he will be doubted. He will not be, attempted to be paid at this ridiculous level because he did get injured, and he's been injured multiple times, and he's around 28, 29 years old. So he's not going to be paid at the peak of the market like he would have been 4 years ago with injury-free. So Godwin's an amazing player, a great talent, a tone setter for this Tampa team, a grinder, a tough receiver, a guy that's going to make all the tough catches in traffic for Baker Mayfield. And you want to keep that guy in your building. You want to keep that personality. You want to keep that charm. You want to keep that leadership. You want to keep that individual in Tampa Bay. And I think they will. So I think they re-sign Chris Godwin to go with Mike Evans and Baker Mayfield and Bucky Irving for 2025 and beyond. Next, our fifth free agent of 2025 is Sam Darnold, the best quarterback. Now, here we get something a little spicy. I am going Titanic here with the Titans signing Sammy Darnold to a big money deal. Now, I really did think about the Pittsburgh Steelers on this one, but I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are too big of pansies to pull off this move. So I'm going with the Titans to make a tremendous quarterback move. I think this is going to be big time. I'm not sure whether it's going to pay off or not, and I'm not sure it's going to live up to the contract, and I'm not sure even about the fit necessarily, because I don't know if Sam Darnold and Callahan are necessarily the right fit from a schematical perspective. But what I do know is Tennessee doesn't seem to like the quarterbacks in the draft. They pick first in the damn draft. Okay? It feels like they're going to pick Abdul Carter. All right? So if they're not going to pick a quarterback at 1 and they have all this money to spend in free agency, I mean, they're not like top 3 in free agency dollars, but they have like $50+ million to spend. They're one of the teams with the most money that has a quarterback need, right? Them, Pittsburgh. There's a couple teams at the top, but Tennessee needs a quarterback. And Tennessee can't go into next season with Mason Rudolph and Will Levis. So I feel like in order to inspire hope in their team, Tennessee has shown aggression in free agency. They've shown aggression in this latest regime in going out and getting players and acquiring talent, right? They went out and they got Calvin Ridley. They went out and they signed Tony Pollard. They went out and they signed Lloyd Cushenberry. They went out and they traded or signed for Ernest Jones, remember? And then they traded him again. They went out and they traded for L'Jarius Sneed. I mean, they've gone out and they've tried to pick their spots, right? Big time, especially last offseason. They have another opportunity here. So unlike Pittsburgh, a franchise that, needs a quarterback, is maybe in more of a contending window than Tennessee, they just don't show any sort of testicles for me to put together the link that they'll make this move. It feels like they'll be more likely to go after and re-sign Justin Fields or something like that, while Tennessee is going to be ballsy. They're going to be big, and they're going to be bold. And if you're thinking about it for this regime, I mean, how many years do you truly have to prove your worth in your time? It feels like Callahan's already on the hot seat. I'm not even lying. But he needs a quarterback to prove that he's a coach. He needs a guy that can at least execute at a modest level. And I think at the very least with Sam Darnold, you're getting a solid starter. You might not be getting a superstar. You might not be getting Sam Darnold from Minnesota with Justin Jefferson and everybody else, but you might be getting a good, solid quarterback that you can build around And you can at least like figure out and fill your roster and build your team in a division that, I mean, it's the weakest kind of division in that AFC. So if you're going to make a risk, if you're going to go bold, why not go bold in Tennessee? So Sam Darnold signs with the Titans, in my opinion. Next, the Jacksonville Jags will sign one of my favorite defenders in free agency, and that is Jevon Holland of the Miami Dolphins, formerly, because I think he'll find a home in Florida with Jacksonville. Now, the one connection I can make here was that Jacksonville's new defensive coordinator is Green Bay's linebacker coach. He also coached in Miami the 3 seasons previous to last year. And Holland has been one of the best, most inspiring young defenders on Miami the last few years, and his play has constantly been going up when that coach was there, okay? So I feel like this is a fit schematically. Holland will be able to transition fairly easily. Jacksonville was the worst or the second worst team against the pass last year. Like, they were very bad last season against the pass. How do you defend the pass? You bring in a free safety, roaming player that can cover a lot of ground, right? That can make up for mistakes at corner. And if Jacksonville does want to lean into more man coverage like they did last year, or if they want to lean into single high, whatever they want to do, Holland can fit any system, any scheme, right? He's a good tackler. He flies the football. He's a ball hawk in many ways, just in terms of his ability to fill the void. And I think he can play, downhill. He could do a lot of different things. He's a great athlete. He's a player that I don't even think has hit his peak yet. And he is a player that will be coveted by the NFL. I think he's going to get a good contract on the open market. And it's also convenient for him if he stays in Florida, right? He doesn't have to go very far, from Miami to Jacksonville. So that's also kind of a bonus, right? But I feel like Holland will go somewhere, not necessarily familiar, but somewhere where he'll make the money. Jacksonville needs defense. They need safety. It's one of their biggest needs. They need pass defense. And there's some sort of connection to the scheme, and it's close. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense to me. Next up, you've got the Vikings making a huge splash after losing Sam Darnold and deciding to go with J.J. McCarthy as their future of their quarterback position. They will decide to go big on defense and sign Milton Williams. I considered the New England Patriots for Milton Williams as well, but this one is basically me banking on that Brian Flores wants a big man in the middle of his defense. They addressed the edge position last offseason with Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard, but one of the areas they could improve is their interior defensive line, right? They've got Harrison Phillips, who's a solid run defender, but they need a guy that can get to the quarterback from the interior. When Flores was in Miami, he spent time acquiring defensive tackles. Christian Wilkins in the first round comes to mind. Davis in the second round comes to mind. They spent capital on that position. No, he's not necessarily in charge of those decisions on who they sign, but he's heavily influential in the defensive construction. And I think having a guy that can penetrate the interior and can really do damage that way, I think is something that Flores would love to have. So being that they have multiple players that are free agents on the inside for them, including Jerry Tillery, I think that this player would be a standout for the Vikings. And the Vikings have also looked at this type of player, right? Like a 26-year-old player, kind of like Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, right? Like that 26, 27-year-old guy that they can sign that's just hitting their peak. That's Milton Williams, right? So there's a lot there in terms of connection. I feel like he'd be a good scheme fit. I feel like he'd elevate the Viking defense. And I think they're more inclined to spend on the defensive line rather than the corner secondary. But we'll see. Next up, we got the Baltimore Ravens re-signing Ronnie Stanley. As a Patriots fan, this hurts. But my belief is that Stanley will stay at home in Baltimore because it's a contending team. He'll get paid. Baltimore has enough money. They really do need a left tackle. Like, without him, they're kind of toast at that position. Actually, they have 2 free agents, starting left guard, starting left tackle. So they've got both guys they've got to deal with. They want to protect Lamar Jackson. That's pretty important. I just don't know why they would let him walk. Like, they're a contending team that's in the Super Bowl window. Why try to go like young at this position when you don't know how good that player is going to be? Like, left tackle is such an important position. So I feel like Ronnie Stanley's going to get like a 3-year deal. He's going to get paid a solid amount, but he does have a little bit of an injury history, right? He is a little bit older. He's just entering his 30s, right? So he's not a prime target of a free agent that teams are going to just spend out the wazoo for. So like Ronnie Stanley, I could see going back to Baltimore because I think he prefers to go back. They're a good team, and they realize if they let him walk, it's going to be hard to replace him. So Ronnie Stanley to Baltimore. The Patriots will finally make a move in this video. Josh Sweat will sign with the New England Patriots. The Patriots need an edge rusher, and I think this is the one area that people are sleeping on where they could really spend their money. Because this is Mike Vrabel, after all, a former edge rusher in his own right at one point in his career. He played both linebacker and edge rusher. And Josh Sweat had an incredible Super Bowl. I mean, I don't think there's many guys out there that really appreciate clutch play more than Mike Vrabel, and Sweat definitely dominated the Super Bowl in a big way. I think Sweat also fits that defense with his length, power, and just his overall game. Like, he's a very complete player and a complete athlete. He can win on the perimeter as a pass rusher. He can set the edge physically in the run game. He's just a very complete player that can play standing up or, with his hand in the dirt. He's played 4-3-esque style, right? Defensive end. He's played 3-4 stand-up in this Vic Fangio scheme. He has a lot of versatility, a lot of great length, a little bit of bend, and a proven track record. He's also not too old, but he would inject a lot of pass rush for the Patriots. So this makes a lot of sense for me. I considered Milton Williams as well, but it feels like New England has Barmore, so at least they have one fundamental key piece to the interior as opposed to the edge, where they don't really, right? Like, Keon White is kind of a good 2 in my opinion, but having White and Sweat, now we're talking, then you can move White around and do some funky things with him as an interior rusher. So it allows some versatility too. And then going into the draft, I don't think they're going to get this type of player because they pick at 4. I don't think Carter's going to be there at 1 because I think he'll go 1 or at 4. I think he'll go 1 or 2. So I don't think he'll be there at 4. I think they're more likely to pick a Mason Graham, or they're more likely to pick a wide receiver, or they're more likely to pick a tackle at 4 rather than an edge player. So it makes sense with all the money they have to spend money on arguably the best edge rusher there is in free agency. Okay, so that's why I went with Josh Sweat to the Patriots. Next, I've got Khalil Mack re-signing with the Chargers. I actually didn't want to do this, but this feels most realistic given Jim Harbaugh's interviews as of late, basically pleading desperately for Khalil Mack to return to his football team. He was basically, he's been on some interviews with his general manager, and he's been saying like, yeah, we need to pay this guy, like pay this man. Like, he's literally said that out of his own mouth. Khalil Mack is obviously awesome. Last year, he was like one of the most destructive, dominant edge rushers in football. I'm talking 2023. 2024, he was graded at even a higher clip despite a lack of production. But he's one of those guys that he's a future Hall of Famer. He's powerful. He's still twitchy at his age. He's dominant as a run defender, one of the best in football. He sets the tone from a leadership and just a overall stoic nature for a locker room. And that's the type of Jim Harbaugh guy that he wants in his building. So like a 2-year deal, a good amount of money. I think Mack would rather stay in Los Angeles. They're also like building something nice there. They do need at least one of their edge rushers to return, whether it be Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa. And it feels like maybe Joey Bosa could leave. I thought about Khalil Mack going to the Niners, but if Joey Bosa were to be the one to be available, that would make even more sense to going to the Niners for obvious reasons. So Khalil Mack, to me, would be a re-sign with the Chargers. I think it's likely, given that Jim Harbaugh is very involved in personnel. Jim Harbaugh is going to want Khalil Mack. He's already stated it. And I think Khalil Mack will want to come back as long as they give him a solid contract. All right. Next up, the Patriots once again get on the board, signing the former Ram left tackle Jackson, who is a rising star at the left tackle position. He's 26 years old. And what I like about this fit is the versatility of his game. The Rams run a run game system that is zone and power based. They run a lot of different runs. They like to run a lot of duo runs where they're getting double teams out in space. They like to run a lot of outside and inside zone as well over the years in Los Angeles. And this is something that Mike Vrabel has talked about his football team offensively, having Josh McDaniels as the offensive coordinator. You want linemen that can execute a lot of different styles of run game. And I think Jackson would fit that. He's also at the biggest position of need for the Patriots. They need a tackle desperately. I think they want to address at least one of their tackle positions in free agency. And I think they would be willing to overpay because they have so much money. So a guy like Jackson is maybe more viewed as like the 10th to 12th best tackle in football, potentially, right? But with that being said, he probably could get paid at a top 5 level from a desperate team like New England that desperately needs that position and desperately needs to protect Drake May, right? So fits the run game scheme, kind of in his prime, just entering his prime, potentially there, and enough reasons for the Patriots to spend some cash on a tackle that they really need to upgrade. Next up, the Chicago Bears, signing one of my favorite potential targets in free agency, Mekhi Becton. I just believe that Becton had an awesome year with Philadelphia, and I think he still has so much room to grow. And if Chicago can't get Trey Smith, I think Mekhi Becton is the next best guard to go and get for the long term. Like, yes, he's a little bit riskier than a Kevin Zeitler, but Zeitler is a much older player, and Chicago is a team that's still building around Caleb Williams. They're not like an immediate contender right now. So you want a player that's like in his prime, maybe just entering his prime. He's really only had 1 year of playing like guard at a high level. So you still got a lot of room for him to grow. And you're talking about Becton, who's strangely quick and fast and twitchy for a player that is an absolute Hercules on the football field. He is a behemoth of a human being. Like, Becton looks huge. He is huge. He is a absolute giant. Him in the run game of Ben Johnson is a dangerous possibility, right? And I think that Chicago is going to spend some money on building that run game from their offensive line. And I think Becton would be a huge part of that. He's a little bit lesser of a pass blocker, but again, he was drafted as a tackle. Like, he's not a bad pass blocker, okay? He's just more fit to be a guard because I think his size and his rare twitchiness at that position is a problem for a lot of defenses. Okay, so Becton, I think it also helps him from a health standpoint, from the movability standpoint, the bendability standpoint. I think because he's so big, oftentimes at tackle, a lot of the movement of tackle would cause him to really wear his body down, in my opinion. But at guard, I think it's a little bit different. So I think the Bears signed Becton to a beastly contract. Next, the Lions signed one of my favorite defensive back free agents, and I really feel super underrated by many people entering this offseason. That's Paulson Adebo of the New Orleans Saints. And I really took note of Paulson Adebo, especially at a high-level point of view entering free agency, when I saw that Bill Belichick had Adebo as one of his second-team all-NFL players. That is something that when you're talking about defense and you're talking about corner and you're talking about Bill Belichick, he knows what he's talking about and he knows what he's watching. So Paulson Adebo is a very good player, very underrated man-to-man coverage corner, good in press coverage, got very good length, very feisty. Yes, he gives up some plays, but he also is one of those guys that forces a high incompletion rate, right? Paulson Adebo is a perfect fit for the feisty Detroit secondary. If they want to continue to play Aaron Glenn's man coverage style defense, Adebo would be perfectly suited for that defense, right? But if they want to continue to play a lot of press and maybe they want to shift to more zone, I feel like he could do that as well as a high level. So Adebo's one of those guys that's kind of right entering his prime after his first contract and is underrated enough for you to maybe get away with not having to pay him too much. But I feel like this is a guy that a lot of NFL fans are going to be shocked by how much money he maybe gets. So watch out for him this offseason. I think the Lions would be a great fit, though. They need a number one corner more than anything else on their entire team. So I think if they are to overspend on anything, it would be for a cornerback here. Next, the 49ers will sign another super underrated defensive name. That is Osa Obdighizuwa of the Dallas Cowboys. One of my favorite players, underrated players over the last couple of years is Obdighizuwa. I love his quickness, his twitchiness, his hand usage inside, his burst and pop off the football. I think he's a perfect scheme fit for the 49ers, who are playing that 49ers Seattle scheme, Robert Saleh style of defense. And within that defense, you need those defensive tackles that can penetrate and quickly get into the backfield and can pin their ears back and get after it. And I think Obdighizuwa has quietly been one of the most productive down-to-down pressure players at the defensive tackle position. The Niners have decided to move on from Jevon Holland. They need an immediate impact player at that position, as they are a contender. They are a team that view themselves as an NFC contender. They're going to want to build their defensive line further, and this player is a great fit. So I think it's a match made in heaven, truly, for Robert Saleh, for Obdighizuwa. He's seen his team get annihilated by the 49ers. That also has to play a role in his mind, too. So I think Obdighizuwa could potentially be a player that, unlike Jevon Holland when they signed him, a little bit past his prime or just getting past his prime, he might just be hitting his prime. So I would really love this fit for the 49ers. Next up, the 49ers will also re-sign Dre Greenlaw, and I promise you guys, I didn't mean for this to be back-to-back. This is just exactly how it worked out in my free agency rankings. Dre Greenlaw will re-sign with the 49ers. Now, I considered Carolina as a potential location for him, but the 49ers, I've heard some rumors as of late that they really want him back. I think a lot of that is stemming from Robert Saleh. He loves to have two awesome linebackers within his defense, Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw. It's a perfect combination. You've got the ferociousness, the toughness, the fearlessness of Dre Greenlaw flying around to the football, kind of like his Quincy Williams. And you've got the smart, intellectual coverage guy like the CJ Mosley, the Fred Warner, right? So that combination of those two players is exactly what Saleh covets and needs within his defense to work at a high level. That second level, that speed is hugely impactful. And we even saw how impactful Dre Greenlaw was when he was on the field for the 49ers for those brief moments this year, even coming off an Achilles. He'll have more time to prepare, more time to repair, and more time to look like his former self in 2025. I also think he'll go a little cheaper than expected because he is coming off an Achilles, which NFL teams don't take lightly. So I think that does give a hometown discount for the 49ers here. Next up, the Green Bay Packers will sign DJ Reid, a former Robert Saleh cornerback. The Packers' new defensive coordinator from last year, right? Hafley is a former 49er guy, and Reid is always been in that system. He's been in that system in Seattle, San Francisco, and New York, right? He's been in that Seattle scheme, press coverage, press bail system, a lot of quarters coverages, a lot of cover 3 at one point, and a little bit of cover 1. So he's used to playing man or zone, pressing at the line, with his eyes on the cornerback and backpedaling. And he's very good in this system. He's been an excellent number 2 corner. And with Alexander potentially moving on, getting traded, going somewhere else, I think that Reid could really be a good, solid replacement because he's been very healthy for the most part, despite his lack of size. I think he's a very good player, a very consistent player, and he's consistently been kind of underrated And those are the type of players that the Packers typically go after in free agency. The good players, but maybe a little underrated. And I just think it's a really good fit. And they're going to need to sign a corner. So I think they'd rather go after somebody like Reid, who they feel confident about in their system. I thought about Charvarius Ward, but the Packers kind of tend to go with not the older guy. And Ward is already going to be on his third team, potentially. Like Reid, yes, probably like his fourth team or third team or whatever, but he's a little bit younger than Ward. So I've got Reid to the Packers here. Next up, the Washington Commanders make a splash signing with Stefon Diggs. Yes, I like this fit for Stefon Diggs. And I also like this for the Commanders because I don't think they're going to have to spend a pretty penny for Stefon Diggs. I think, first of all, veteran receivers are going to be very, very attracted to playing for and with Jayden Daniels. I think just as he was with CJ Stroud, I think Stefon Diggs is going to be interested in the young Jayden Daniels. And I also feel like Diggs is a perfect player at this point in his career to complement Terry McLaurin, right? Diggs in Houston was doing a lot of slot stuff, a lot of short, intermediate, quick routes, and he's also still very good as a yak threat. And those things are very big in Washington's offense with Cliff Kingsbury. You ever notice how many bubble screens they throw, how many quick throws they make, and how much they rely on their yak? But Diggs also has that versatility to be able to be elusive from the slot and then also line up out wide and run routes out wide. So you could kind of use him interchangeably with Terry McLaurin. McLaurin probably has, especially after the ACL, more deep speed, more vertical dimension to his game than Diggs at this point. But Diggs has always been like that move Z receiver in his career. So I could see Diggs being an absolute short intermediate demon for Jayden Daniels. Plus, he's from the Maryland area. I believe he went to high school and grew up in this area. So that would also be a homecoming for him too. Next, the Jets will sign Justin Reid and steal him from Kansas City. I like this fit a lot for Justin Reid, and this is why I am going with this one, because Aaron Glenn needs safeties. Both his safeties are free agents. He's going to have a fresh slate. He's obviously a former defensive back in his own right. If the Jets are going to spend money this offseason, it will be for his defense so that his side of the ball shines, right? There's a little bit of a reconstruction going on with the Jets. There's a little bit of a rebuild going on. But at the same time, they have enough money to kind of reconstruct this defense and make it very good this year. And Justin Reid could be a great piece for this defense. First of all, he's very experienced blitzer. He's a very experienced man coverage player, which Aaron Glenn really likes. He's a hybrid chess piece. He's played free safety, strong safety. He could probably play nickel, right? He's kind of like a linebacker on the field in some ways, but he's a tight end coverage player. Like, he does so much for Kansas City, and he really proved his worth there. He even kicked the ball off and kicked extra points at some point, right? Like, he does everything. So I could see Aaron Glenn looking at him and fitting into his defense, because we know Spags will be dicey with his blitzes and his zero blitzes. Aaron Glenn wants to do the same. We know that Spags puts a lot of pressure on his safeties to be kind of flexible in coverage and to be disguised in coverage. And I could see Reid kind of being a little bit like Brian Branch in some ways. So I like Reid a lot. Plus, he's a great tackler. Next, the Chargers will sign a guard to protect and guard Justin Herbert. That is, of course, Kevin Zeitler. I like Zeitler to the Chargers because there's a connection between him and Greg Roman. Greg Roman and Zeitler were together in Baltimore, and Zeitler was a good player for Baltimore during that tenure. He actually is coming off an extremely impressive season as a late career player, but I think he's going to leave Detroit because of that. I think he's going to get and earn a little bit of money. The Chargers have like the second or third most money in free agency. I think they're in the top 4. So, that's pretty good. And I feel like this is one of their biggest low-key spots that they need to address. Like, they need to address interior pass rush defense, basically. They need to address protecting Herbert from the middle of the pocket. And also, Zeitler, the experience with the system already does help. But I think he would definitely ensure Herbert's protection. So pretty simple. Chargers have enough money to afford and maybe overpay a little bit of an older player. The Chargers are going to have a lot of cap space, which means they can address a lot of needs. They were already a playoff team. They have an upper echelon quarterback. They have a well-respected coach. They have a coach that Zeitler literally played for his brother. He's already played for the offensive coordinator. There's just a lot of connection here, and this is an obvious need. So Zeitler to the Chargers. Next up, the Washington Commanders will steal another Dallas Cowboy for Dan Quinn. That's Demarcus Lawrence to the Commander defense. I thought about him re-signing with Dallas. I think that's a possibility. But Jerry Jones is kind of cheap right now, and I don't really see it happening. I think this just, to me, is like an easy one. Like, I don't know if he's going to go to Washington necessarily. I couldn't really see another location where I really loved the fit. I think that Dan Quinn has loved signing these Dallas players that he had, obviously. I mean, he signed Dante Fowler. He signed Dorrance Armstrong, 2 edge rushers, right? He signed the center, Biadish, right? They've signed guys, okay? And Bobby Wagner was a former player for him. Like, he likes the familiarity with his defense, okay? And Demarcus Lawrence is one of those players. Jonathan Allen is a guy that could be traded or moved this offseason. Lawrence can play edge, but he can also play inside. He can rush from inside really effectively, and he's a great fundamental player. He's a great run defender. And the Commanders did struggle with the run last year. I think Lawrence would really help them set the edge. And I think Lawrence could be a missing piece on their defensive line, whether they have Jonathan Allen or not. I think it would only help acquire him if Allen is moved, because that would open up that possibility of Lawrence potentially moving around the defensive line in a lot of different ways. I think Dan Quinn enjoys having those flexible pieces along his defensive front. And I think Lawrence wants to go somewhere that's going to be a good team, a good culture. And I think that is probably more likely to be Washington than Dallas, to be honest. Like, if you're sitting there and you're asking yourself if you're Demarcus Lawrence, I know you've been with Dallas your whole career, but is there a better chance you win with Washington or Dallas right now? And I think, honestly, it's Washington. Like, these veteran players are probably going to want to play there, and they're probably going to be able to get paid because of how much cap space Washington does offer. And Dante Fowler is a free agent, so they still have Dorrance Armstrong there, but that's another reason that they could sign DeMarcus Lawrence in case they lose Fowler too. Or maybe they even bring all 3 of those Dallas guys together. The Texans will address the offensive line with their rival, Ryan Kelly of the Indianapolis Colts. Kelly will be interesting to see where he lands, because to me, he's obviously the best center on the market, but he's had injuries throughout the course of his career, especially in the head. So we'll see how that works out for Houston, but Houston desperately needs to make a move for their interior offensive line. It was by far the worst in football last year. Like, it wasn't even particularly close. CJ Stroud was pressured on average as much as Patrick Mahomes was in the Super Bowl on average in every game of last season. And I think that they feel like they can find guard. They still have Shaq Mason. Titus Howard could play that spot. Multiple, of their other interior players like Scruggs could play guard too, right? So it feels like they could have a competition at guard, while center might be more viable for them to go out and spend some money. Kelly is also a very good run blocker, and Houston loved to run the ball last year and the last couple of years. DeMeco Ryans loves that to be a part of his physical football team, so Kelly would definitely help there. Having a veteran players to address, a veteran player at center to help address the checks and balances of an offensive line and getting everybody set up for their protections. That would also help the maturity of CJ Stroud and this offense. So they've got a new offensive coordinator. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to change things here, but I do think Ryan Kelly is definitely going to be a guy that teams are looking at. And I could see him leaving the Colts just because it's not the Colts' MO to spend on a player that's had injuries, that's a little bit older. But for Houston, they don't mind age. It definitely feels that way after signing Joe Mixon, trading for Stefon Diggs, trading for Shaq Mason, Danielle Hunter. They don't mind spending Jimmy Ward. They don't mind going out and getting veteran players that are a little bit older, that are in their 30s, as long as they're good players. And Kelly is objectively a good player that objectively would improve their worst area of their team. Next, The Las Vegas Raiders will sign Carlton Davis. Carlton Davis is my number 22 free agent. Davis has a connection with Tom Brady. That's obvious. I think Carlton Davis would, be probably recruited to the Raiders by Tom Brady. I could see it as a good fit for their defense too, as their defense likes to play a good amount of zone, where Davis has been comfortable in Tampa Bay, but also, likes to be versatile. Play some man, some zone. I think they need a bigger, more physical corner to complement Jack Jones, who's more of a quickie, twitchier ball playmaker type of corner. And they need a corner in general. Like, they need a perimeter corner. So I think Davis could get a decent contract after having a pretty darn successful season in Detroit last year on average. Like, he did miss some time, but when he was on the field, he was very good. I think Brady knows him intimately in terms of his game. I think he'll be able to tell his entire staff what you can get from this player because he's faced him in practice, seen him on the field, all that sort of stuff. And I think Davis is a grinder. He's got that mindset that you want at corner. I think he really fits the Raiders, in my opinion. So he's got this toughness, this grit to him, this mentality. I could see that being transferable to Las Vegas and fitting an obvious need in the secondary for P. Carroll. Next, the Denver Broncos are going to surprise and sign Keenan Allen. Yes, I know that people think he'll go to the Chargers again. I don't see it because McConkey's a slot player, and that's what Keenan Allen is at this point. I don't think he'll return to Chicago. I don't think he had fun in Chicago. I'm not going to lie about that. Could he go to the Rams if they keep Stafford? I think that's a possibility. Could he go to Pittsburgh? I thought about it, but because Pittsburgh will not be aggressive with quarterback, I think they probably won't be aggressive with receiver either. So I'm going with Denver because Sean Payton loves those taller, big slot players. Keenan Allen is quietly like a 6'2", 6'3" wide receiver with good size. He's extremely, extremely gifted in terms of his vision of the field, his understanding of zone coverage, his just ability to be so high IQ in terms of developing plays in the RPO game. He'll be a great asset for Bo Nix, just finding those quick holes in the zones. Option routes, he's very savvy and sound in that regard. He's a very comfortable target to throw the ball to. He's never really had a problem with any quarterback he's played with in terms of his body language, the way he plays wide receiver. I feel like he'd be a great fit for Bo Nix, like a safety blanket, so to speak, something that they don't really have, right? Like, they've got the explosive speed threat in Marvin Mims. They've got a downfield perimeter player in Cortland Sutton, but they kind of need that chain mover, that Michael Thomas for Sean Payton. And Keenan Allen very much is still playing at a high level, and I think he'd fit that slot role really, really well. Our 24th free agent, second last in this video, is Charvarius Ward, and I have him signing with the Minnesota Vikings. I had the Vikings making a big splash with Milton Williams on defense, and I think they'll secure a corner on the perimeter with Charvarius Ward. Now, this one is a little out of left field, but I do think that the Vikings need a corner pretty badly. Ward has proven that he can play in basically any sort of system, whether it be in a Seattle scheme, San Francisco scheme style, or a totally kind of polar opposite in some ways, Steve Spagnuolo style. Those two commonalities are that both teams like the physicality of press coverage. That was the commonality between the two stops. The commonality between Charvarius Ward going to Minnesota would be press coverage is something that Flores would like to be able to deploy. Blitzing is something that Spags and Flores have in common. Cover two shells in that regard as well is something that Charvarius Ward will have experience with. And I just feel like he's a chess piece that you can use as a man or zone player. He is still, in my opinion, a CB1 quality player, although he's not like a dominant corner. But he's one of those guys that I feel like could definitely benefit from a change of scenery to some degree. Last year, he had a really tough time in his personal life. He lost his child. I feel like he would bounce back in a different location, maybe just a fresh mindset around an absolute dog of a defensive coordinator in Brian Flores who can get the most out of him and really employ him in the right way. So I think Charvarius Ward would be a very good fit for the Vikings and help their secondary. I think that was their biggest area of weakness, was that corner position last season. And our final player for the top 25 is Brandon Scherff. I have him signing with the Miami Dolphins, guys. This one is only tough for the financials because Miami is not exactly the team with the most cap space, but I don't think Brandon Scherff is going to demand a ton of money given his age. He's a veteran. He has declined overall in terms of his quality, but he's still a good, solid guard. Like, that's why he's my 25th player. Good player. I know what I'm getting from him, and Miami just needs a good guard. They need to protect Tua. They need to be physical up the interior. They need to be able to move people. And Brandon Scherff has pretty much played in every sort of offense throughout his career. And I feel like he's best at home in zone-based running games. And I feel like Brandon Scherff would fit in Miami for that reason. He's also a better pass blocker than a run blocker, which is something that I feel like Miami is into. So, and then I just think they need to address the offensive line. Like, both their guards are free agents. They could use a little more money on securing the middle of the pocket for Tua. So, yeah, Brandon Scherff to Miami. He stays within the same state where he's been at, kind of like Jevon Holland, as we discussed earlier, and he fills a huge need. Miami has 2 guards as free agents, both starters. So Brandon Scherff to the Miami Dolphins is the final free agency prediction for part 1. If you enjoyed part 1 of my NFL free agency predictions, spike the like button. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to comment. It's Mitch. We'll see you in part 2. 100 likes. Deuces.